It was March 2nd, 2016. Vijay Mallya, the billionaire once dubbed the King of Good Times, disappeared without warning. This was the same man who, just years earlier, had thrown a birthday bash so over the top that he flew in Lionel Richie to perform. The guest list included Bollywood stars, international models, and global tycoons. The champagne flowed like water. Helicopters circled overhead. Waiters in tuxedos served caviar on the beaches of Goa, while fireworks lit up the sky to the tune of All Night Long. Mallya wasn't just rich, he was theatrical. He lived like royalty in a country where millions still lived without electricity. Private jets, super yachts, a fleet of 200 luxury cars, and a $20 million mansion with a helipad in South Africa, one of many. But behind that glittering facade, something darker was brewing. By the time he boarded that first-class Emirates flight out of Delhi, one step ahead of the law, Vijay Mallya owed Indian banks over 9,000 crore. That's roughly $1.3 billion, a sum so massive it could have funded free healthcare for millions or rebuilt entire villages. Instead, it was gone, burned through in the name of private jets, Formula One sponsorships, and a failing airline. When the banks came calling, Mallya vanished. No media saw him leave, no customs agent stopped him. But he didn't slip away like a fugitive. He walked through the VIP lounge like a man who still believed he was above it all. And the Indian government? They launched an international hunt to bring him back. A saga that would stretch across nearly a decade through countless courtrooms, diplomatic standoffs, and public outrage. But to understand how one man could pull off the most expensive vanishing act in Indian financial history, we have to go back to the moment when a liquor prince inherited a kingdom and decided to turn it into a playground. Vijay Mallya was raised in wealth, but he wasn't always the headline-chasing showman the world came to know. His grandfather was a traditional businessman, strict, structured, and deeply rooted in the post-colonial ethics of Indian industry. His father, Vijay Mallya, was more sophisticated, more Western in thinking, and far more ambitious. Under Vijay's leadership, United Breweries, or UB Group, quietly became India's biggest alcohol conglomerate. But Vijay wasn't flashy. He wore tailored suits, lived with restraint, and treated the business like a legacy to preserve. Vijay was different. He studied at La Martiniere College in Calcutta, then graduated from St. Xavier's College with a degree in commerce. He was bright, articulate, and hungry for something more than spreadsheets and balance sheets. In the 1970s, he was sent to intern in the US to, quote, see how real business worked. He returned not just with new ideas, but with an entirely different worldview. He admired luxury, ambition, and image. He believed a brand wasn't just a product, it was a lifestyle. Then in 1983, fate moved quickly. Vijay Mallya died suddenly. Vijay, just 28 years old, inherited the chairmanship of United Breweries. Most people expected a quiet transition, a young man holding the reins until older hands could steer the ship. Instead, Vijay took the wheel with both hands and floored it. One of his first moves was to rebrand Kingfisher beer, a UB product that had quietly dominated the domestic market. He didn't just want it served in bars. He wanted it chilled in crystal glass at five-star hotels, poured on yachts, and associated with high fashion. The old guard had focused on production, supply chains, and staying out of the limelight. But Vijay Mallya had a different philosophy. We don't sell alcohol, we sell an experience. At a time when beer in India was served in steel tumblers and plastic chairs, Mallya brought in professional sommeliers, redesigned bar experiences, and flooded the media with visuals of young, rich, beautiful people sipping Kingfisher under strobe lights and palm trees. It was a cultural shift, and the country took notice. For the first time, alcohol wasn't just tolerated, it was desired. Kingfisher wasn't just beer, it was freedom, modernity, and status. But this wasn't just a marketing campaign. It was the start of a much larger vision. Because Mallya didn't just want to sell drinks. He wanted to own the entire idea of the good life. And to do that, he had to fly even higher. The next move he made wasn't just bold, it was reckless. In the early 2000s, India was transforming. The economy was opening up, the middle class was expanding, and a new generation was craving more than just survival. They wanted a taste of the high life. And no one symbolized that dream better than Vijay Mallya. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a walking billboard for luxury. While most Indian billionaires stayed discreet behind boardroom walls, Mallya put himself front and center. Gold chains, designer suits, sunglasses even at night. He lived like a movie star, and he wanted the world to watch. But just as he was turning Kingfisher beer into India's most iconic lifestyle brand, the government struck back. In an effort to curb alcohol consumption, Indian regulators banned all alcohol advertising on television and public media. For most companies, this was a death sentence. But Mallya saw it as a challenge. If he couldn't advertise his beer, he'd advertise everything around it. He launched Kingfisher calendars, filled with top models in exotic locations. He plastered the Kingfisher logo on cricket jerseys, yachts, race cars, and even college festivals. He sponsored fashion weeks, beauty pageants, and music tours. The red and gold bird wasn't just on beer bottles, it was everywhere. The tagline, "The King of Good Times." And then came the most audacious move yet. In 2005, Vijay Mallya launched Kingfisher Airlines, a premium domestic airline with leather seats, gourmet food, and in-flight entertainment at a time when most Indian carriers were still serving lukewarm samosas and lukewarm coffee. It wasn't just an airline, it was an extension of his brand. The flight attendants wore bright red uniforms styled by top designers. The lounges looked like upscale bars. Every flight began with a glossy welcome video narrated by Vijay Mallya himself. For a while, it worked. Kingfisher Airlines quickly became a favorite among business travelers and Bollywood stars. The airline won multiple awards. People began to speak of Mallya the way they spoke of Branson or Trump, a billionaire showman who made capitalism look cool. But that ambition came at a cost. To expand quickly, Mallya took a high-stakes gamble. He acquired Air Deccan, a struggling low-cost airline hoping to dominate both the luxury and budget segments. Instead, the merger turned into a financial disaster. The business models clashed. Operations became chaotic. And behind the scenes, Kingfisher was bleeding cash. But the king wasn't ready to step off his throne. Even as debts mounted, he went bigger. In 2007, Mallya shocked the motorsport world by buying the struggling Spiker F1 team and rebranding it as Force India, India's first and only Formula One team. He splashed the Kingfisher logo across the cars, parked yachts in Monaco during race weekends, and threw parties that made headlines worldwide. Formula One wasn't just a sport to him. It was a catwalk, a stage, a global billboard. And wherever Mallya went, whether in the pit lanes of Bahrain or the champagne tents of Singapore, India followed. Young people looked up to him. He was living proof that Indians could dream in color, drink champagne instead of chai, and break free from traditional molds. But while the world watched the show, few noticed the smoke building behind the curtain. Kingfisher Airlines was defaulting on payments. Pilots weren't getting paid. Planes sat idle on runways while banks quietly began circling the empire. Still, Mallya wore his signature smirk, waving to paparazzi, boarding private jets, and promising that all was under control. But deep down, even he knew the good times couldn't last forever. Because behind every flamboyant king lies a crumbling castle. And to understand how it all began to unravel, we need to step into the next chapter, the one where uncertainty turns to panic and power starts slipping through his fingers. By 2012, the cracks in Vijay Mallya's empire could no longer be hidden behind red carpets and race cars. Kingfisher Airlines was in free fall. The numbers were brutal. In just 7 years, Kingfisher had never turned a profit. It had racked up losses of over 7,000 crore, around $1.1 billion by 2012. Salaries to over 2,000 employees were delayed for months. Flights were canceled. Maintenance was ignored. More than half of the airline's 66 planes were grounded due to unpaid leasing fees. Airport authorities in cities like Hyderabad and Bangalore refused to refuel Kingfisher aircraft unless they were paid up front. Despite these warning signs, Mallya still flew private, still smiled at the press, still promised a turnaround that never came. But the biggest mystery wasn't Kingfisher's losses. It was how Mallya kept getting money to burn. Between 2004 and 2012, 17 Indian banks lent him more than 9,000 crore rupee, an amount equivalent to $1.3 billion. At the center of it was the State Bank of India, India's largest lender, which alone extended more than 1,600 crore rupee, $200 million to Kingfisher. Why did they keep funding a failing airline? That's where the story gets murky. Some say it was Mallya's reputation. He wasn't just a borrower, he was a public figure, a member of parliament, and a man with powerful friends in both business and politics. Others believe it was something more insidious. Investigators later found that many of these loans were granted without proper collateral. Some were disbursed based on projected brand value, a metric with no tangible security. Even more alarming, a 900 crore rupee loan from IDBI Bank was approved despite internal red flags suggesting that Kingfisher was financially unsustainable. In 2016, the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, alleged that certain bank officials may have bent the rules to allow these massive dispersals. As the debts piled up and Kingfisher officially ceased operations in October 2012, public pressure exploded. It wasn't just about a failing airline anymore. It was about a billionaire living lavishly on borrowed public money, while his workers went unpaid and the Indian taxpayer picked up the tab. By 2014, the banks had had enough. All 17 lenders, led by SBI, joined hands to file a lawsuit against Mallya. They accused him of willful default, a damning label in India's financial system reserved for those who had the ability to repay their loans but chose not to. A report by the Serious Fraud Investigation Office, SFIO, added fuel to the fire, uncovering irregular fund movements, shell company transfers, and suspected siphoning of money. And while the banks were preparing for courtroom war, Mallya was still abroad, attending races and galas, acting as if none of it applied to him. But something had changed. The public mood had turned. No longer admired, Vijay Mallya became the face of crony capitalism, of privilege without accountability, the king who took but didn't return. And the Indian government, they weren't done, because next came the hunt. By early 2016, the walls were closing in. The Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, was preparing a case. The Enforcement Directorate had begun tracking money transfers between Kingfisher and offshore shell companies. Indian courts were moving to freeze Vijay Mallya's assets. The government was finally waking up to what the banks had long ignored. And yet, on the morning of March 2, 2016, while investigators scrambled to file urgent requests, Vijay Mallya slipped out of India with 12 suitcases and a first-class ticket to London. There were no disguises, no fake passports. He boarded Emirates flight EK511 from Delhi to Dubai, then connected to London. It was legal, but barely. Just hours later, the Debt Recovery Tribunal passed an order blocking his ability to move money abroad. He had timed it perfectly. That night, as headlines broke across India, Vijay Mallya fled the country. There was only one question on everyone's mind. How did he know? It wasn't just luck. Mallya was no ordinary businessman. He was still a sitting member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha. He had access to information no regular citizen could dream of. Some suspected he was tipped off by insiders in Delhi. A week later, the Ministry of External Affairs suspended his passport, but it was already too late. By then, Vijay Mallya was ensconced in a sprawling mansion in Hertfordshire, England, a 20-acre estate with fountains, a golf course, and servants in uniform. He claimed he was in the UK on business, that he hadn't run away, that the Indian media was exaggerating, but the numbers told a different story. By 2016, Mallya owed $1.1 billion to banks, $100,000 to airports and oil companies, and nearly $50,000 in unpaid salaries and dues to his former Kingfisher employees. And yet, in London, he moved freely. No handcuffs, no arrests, no consequences. He began appearing at charity galas, polo tournaments, and vintage car auctions. British paparazzi spotted him at Ascot, at cricket matches, even at bars owned by Indian expats. Each time he was smiling. Each time India seethed. Back home, Kingfisher employees were still protesting on the streets, demanding their wages. The banks had declared Mallya a willful defaulter. The government revoked his diplomatic passport and filed an extradition request with the UK Home Office. And for the first time in modern India, the public watched the country's legal and financial elite chase one man through another country's courts, trying to undo what years of negligence had allowed. But Mallya had lawyers, lots of them. And the longer he stayed in London, the more it began to look like he might never come back. Vijay Mallya's legal strategy was simple: delay, appeal, repeat. His lawyers argued that Indian prisons were unfit for a man of his health. They claimed he was being politically targeted and that extradition would violate human rights. Meanwhile, Mallya lived like royalty in London. He attended polo matches, drank at exclusive clubs, and appeared at parties thrown by Britain's elite. He even gave interviews, claiming he was ready to repay every single penny, if only the banks would be reasonable. But investigations told a different story. He had transferred millions to offshore accounts, bought properties in New York and South Africa, funded lavish lifestyles for his family. Every court delay only deepened the frustration in India. The public, the press, the government, they all wanted to know, how can someone steal from an entire country and still walk free? And yet, the wheels of justice moved slowly. But even as the legal process dragged on, Mallya's image was crumbling, and nothing proved that more than what happened to his crown jewel. For a man obsessed with image, losing Kingfisher wasn't just a financial hit, it was personal. The airline's collapse had turned him into a villain. His employees protested in the streets. His luxury cars were seized. His shares in United Breweries, his father's legacy, were taken over by global giants. Even the iconic Kingfisher Villa in Goa, where Mallya hosted some of the wildest parties in India, was auctioned off to recover debt. He tried to paint himself as a victim of political persecution, but few bought it. He once stood on yachts with Naomi Campbell. Now he stood in courtrooms, dodging reporters and hiding behind tinted windows. The king of good times had become the poster child for bad loans and corporate greed. But here's the twist. The final blow didn't come from a judge or a banker. It came from something far more humiliating. Mallya applied to the UK's Home Office for asylum. The man who once bragged about being too big to fail was now begging to stay, and the verdict, still pending as of today, has turned his story into a cautionary tale of what happens when hubris outruns reality. Vijay Mallya didn't just lose his empire, he lost his identity. Once celebrated as a visionary, he now exists in exile, caught between countries, courts, and consequences. But his story isn't just about one man. It's about a system that rewards glamour over grit, about banks that chase power, not performance, about a society that mistakes wealth for wisdom. Mallya's empire was built on illusion, on gold-plated images and champagne-soaked dreams. But in the end, even the most dazzling illusion can't outrun the truth. And when the truth caught up with Vijay Mallya, it wasn't with a bang.